Welcome to our Wednesday, October 5th, 2022 Exeter Township School District Committee of a Whole meeting. Please note that prior to this meeting, the board met for an executive session regarding a discussion of personnel matters and real estate. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Mr. Fite, can you please take roll call?
Dr. Ann Herring.
Present.
John Fiddler.
Here.
Dr. Andrea Battler.
Here.
Dr. David Hemberger. Jason Mell.
Here.
Timothy Morgan.
Here.
Robert Quinter. Here. Julia Schaefer.
Here.
Allison Wilson.
Here.
8 present, 1 absent.
Thank you, Mr. Fike. In addition to the 8 board members in attendance this evening, we're also joined at the board table by our solicitor, Sharon Montaigne, and members of the school district administration, including Dr. Christy Haller, superintendent, Mrs. Dawn Harris, assistant superintendent, Dr. Eric Flam, director of teaching and learning, Mrs. Diane Skornavaki, director of human resources, and Brian Fike, who serves as our business administrator as well as our board secretary. The meeting minutes are attached. Does anyone have any changes or discussion they would like to make regarding meeting minutes for the special voting meeting and board committee of a whole meeting of September 7th, as well as the board voting meeting of September 19th?
Dr. Herring, I have a couple minor changes on September 7th committee of the whole minutes, as well as the September 19th voting meeting minutes, have Mr. Fiddler's name with an additional D throughout most of the documents, so it's just a minor spelling correction. And on the September 19th voting minutes, page 18, there is a piece there that says if the district locked in on an energy contract immediately, the rate would be 5.6. I believe that rate should have actually been read as 9.6.
Thank you. Next is presentation, an update on the bus garage by Mr. Biggerstaff.
Good evening. I just wanted to give a brief update on where we are with our bus garage project. We're looking at 90% completion.
Mr. Biggerstaff, I'm sorry, I think the microphone may be off or not working, maybe.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. It might have been me. Sorry. So I just wanted to provide an update on the bus garage, where we stand with the work in progress there to complete the project. We are going to be by 90% by 12/17/22, with substantial completion or completion in early 2023, which is actually ahead of time, ahead of schedule. I believe we were contracted out till April, but we should be pretty much finished by January, February. Paving will be starting shortly there as we try to beat the weather and get the paving done before the asphalt plant shut down locally. Electrical will be starting in the next couple weeks. We finally cleared the hurdles with our utility companies and have everything placed. So the target would be early 2023 to have the garage reopen and resume operations there. Is there any questions I could answer for anyone?
Are there any issues with the construction that they're doing already around that area? Will that delay anything, you think?
It should not, no.
Okay, thank you.
Most of our larger, other than getting asphalt trucks in, which we can use 562 down Shelbourne to get there, so we can detour around.
I have 2 questions. First is, after a 2-season drought, now that we've had rain for, I think, 6 days in a row, I'm sure it was a good opportunity for you guys to see what the runoff looked like on the property. Are you guys happy with that? Do you think that there's changes that need to be made? I know there's properties around it. Just want to make sure that the easements look like they're supposed to.
So I did drive past there this morning on my way back from Jacksonville, and it looks to me like it's draining properly at this point. It's hard to tell a little bit yet because we're not at full level so that the water can run to the drains. It's certainly not puddling as it used to in the back of the parking lot. So we do think we have that resolved with the addition of the rain garden and the other stuff that was done and the redirection. One of the things about the project was to control the stormwater runoff in the area, because as you know, you're pitched with Kerr Road and you're going down a constant hill until you reach the back of the property. What they did is in the design, the architects took that into consideration, and they actually put in curbing blocks to try to direct some of the water off the property down Kerr Road while still allowing for water to run off in our property. And then they did do all the drainage. That was probably one of the first things that was done with the project after the demolition, and it seems to be okay.
Second question is, with it being finished in early 23, that leaves us for some potential inclement weather with our current bus locations. We're just curious to know, is there a plan B in case some of that happens? Because, it seems to me where some of those buses are that could create some issues with plowing and clearing those buses off and making sure that we're able to do our pickups in the morning.
I would actually refer that to Ben Bernhardt for the operations portion. I would think that there are some challenges with that, as you point out. One of them being is we have a large metal arch that we use to clean off the top of the buses during inclement weather. Also, the relocation of the buses back to the location, staging, making sure that we can run our operation out of the new, because it takes the bus drivers a little bit of time to learn a new process, because obviously we've changed the whole dynamics of the area. Even though it looks primarily the same, we've changed a little bit. So it might slow us down moving back in there just to get everything relocated, especially if we run into inclement weather. I can't speak. But I don't foresee it as being a major hurdle. I see that as more of a minor hurdle and a logistics hurdle. But we'll certainly support Mr. Bernhardt in getting his operation back over there as soon as we possibly can.
I can probably answer a little bit on that, because last year we moved the bus sweep, or the device that cleans the snow off the buses, over to the junior high or the senior high lower parking lot. And the plan was last year, if we were expecting snow, to basically take all the buses over there so they can run through it before they get out in the street. Because by law, you have 24 hours to get any snow or ice off of a bus. Up until this year, it was a fine if it hit another car. This year, it's a fine if they see it within 24 hours of an event. So I think they just announced that new law recently too. Right. Plus, we want to make sure that people in the town are safe. We're not throwing ice back on cars or whatever. So is that the correct plan, Ben?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah, Mr. Biggerstead, I just want to confirm the electrical charging stations that would be there, would be fully functional as well at the end of the construction, or is there still work yet to be done with the electrical?
So I believe what we're to do by the current design that we were provided was to provide stub offs and locations only.
Okay.
For future. So you will need to provide a charger similar to what you would see at a Wawa for a Tesla.
Yeah. So the conduit is done, but the wiring and everything to get the charging stations in there would still need to happen.
That's correct, yes,
Okay.
sir.
Thank you.
Plus, we got to purchase some buses.
That is absolutely not. Yeah, that's the number one.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Biggerstaff. I appreciate that. We will not be amending the agenda tonight, so we'll go to committees. Education, Mr. Fidler.
Thank you, Dr. Herring. The items on this week's agenda include the one early graduation request, a cornucopia of conference requests, course requests, list attached, field trips within the 60-mile radius. Second graders at Owatton will be going to the Exeter Community Library on October 20th, and a field trip beyond the 60-mile radius is a trip to Germany. My only question here is this paid for by the students, or will the district be paying for that?
I'm going to actually have Mr. Campbell speak to the trip. We're excited that the trips are coming back for the exchange.
Oh, it's great news. I just remember the one, I think there was one to France that I think the students paid for, but I didn't see anything in the write-up that talked about that.
Yeah, we are also very excited to see our foreign exchange programs resuming. The French, German, and ultimately, if we get the Spanish trip that was slated to start right before the pandemic up and running, all of those are student funded, and the chaperones that are organizing those work very hard to come up with programs that are cost effective while at the same time making them accessible. Both of those programs are home stays to try to minimize some of the costs to the students.
Thanks, Tom. And I think the rest of these are tuition agreements and contracts. The first one with New Story. I think that was held over from a previous agenda. Kids Peace, Cottage 7 Education, and a tuition agreement with Elwyn Opportunities School. I think that is the end. Yes, I is the last one. So that's my report. Are there any questions? All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fiddler. Athletics and extracurricular activities, Mrs. Wilson.
Yes, on the agenda, we're going to have a cooperative sponsorship agreement for swimming and diving with the Ole Valley School District, and also changes in terminology and positions for some current coaching positions in the CBA. In addition to that, I did get an email today from Mr. Lagath, and the wrestling trip. The wrestlers would like to go on a trip that is across state lines in December, and they're asking if we could put that on our next voting agenda meeting so that it could get approved, so that they can apply to go on the trip. So if we can add that before the voting meeting as well. Any questions? Thank you.
I did have some questions regarding the extracurricular salary positions. I did ask that for the next voting meeting, if we can kind of get a breakdown of what those positions paid before and what they'll be paid for now with this approval. So we'll get that for the next meeting. That's it. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. Finance, Facilities, and Audit, Mr. Mel.
Yeah, starting off with item A, this is just a transportation agreement with Cottage 7 Transportation. Item B, this is an electric purchase agreement. This would be after our current rates expire in May 2023. So this would be a contract that would cover June 2023 through December 2023. And I believe, Mr. Fike, do you have a recommendation?
The problem with electric purchase, the rate you get that day is only good for that day.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask the solicitor maybe come up with some type of wording for the board meeting that authorizes me to enter into a contract with the lowest company on the following day. Our existing electric purchase agreement was signed in 2018 and expires in May of 2023. As an example, the broker that gave us, that was as of September 30th. I got a quote from an electric supplier as of October 4th, so I really can't say those are apples because it was on 2 different days and 2 different amounts. Right now, the electric supplier would be at 7.25 cents a kilowatt hour plus a penny or I did 7.35 to guarantee that rate that there would be no swings during the 6-month contract. The other ones at that day through the broker were from 9.2 cents to 9.5 cents. I really can't say which was the best. If they are both the same day, I'd recommend going with the IGS directly. But
Is
And sometimes they change rates daily, you
Yeah.
know, or twice a day, I should say.
do you know why their rate is, I mean, significantly lower? Is it because they own the transmission?
They own the transmission. Well, that's what they claim. They own the transmission. You're not paying a broker fee.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
you know, and I guess they don't deal with brokers, so maybe they're saving themselves money.
Okay.
I've asked the engineers. They said they're a good company, but you know, until I get on the same day, but I think we need to lock into a rate for at least 6 months next year, because if we do decide to go with the solar, we're not going to be have that available to probably January, and that's pushing it. So I'm asking her for June through December, but I'd rather know what my rate's going to be. Right now, it's double what we're paying. In the solar contract, when we started this last May, I used what the going rate was 7.9. Haven't changed it at all because I wanted to stay apples to apples all the way through when we're comparing. This would make it a little bit less, which would make us save more in the long run. But I'm not, until the 20th, the day after the board authorized me to sign the contract, I won't know exactly what the rate will be.
Okay.
But it will be, at least for the first 6 months, double what we're paying now.
My only recommendation would be, if it's possible, to whatever we take to the voting meeting, to approve whatever supplier is going to have the cheapest rate.
Okay, or give me a maximum,
Right.
or give me authority to do it with, conferring with Jason or someone else
Yeah.
on board.
Yeah. I just hate to lock in the IGS or whoever,
Right.
and then all of a sudden their rate is higher than everybody else's. That's the only
In the
thing.
past, what happened is the school district joined a consortium, so whatever the consortium said we had to go with.
Yeah.
It's gotten to the point that consortiums, like in insurances, help you a lot because they offset some risk, but the suppliers now, or someone our size, the consortium doesn't really help on the rates. Someone small, like this, a single school, if we're just doing a single school, might help, but our volume, it doesn't really help.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
Would it be advisable to lock in for 12 months rather than 6? I mean, you don't have to.
You're locked,
You don't have to keep it for 12 months.
depending on the
Just for,
carrier. I could probably lock in for 12 with a slight escalation, or they'll give me a 12-month rate.
right.
I could probably have that for the next meeting too, right before you vote.
But that wouldn't
But it'd
mean that you have to.
happen. Like our existing contract, we bought the electric up front.
Mhm.
That's why it was so low. And it was beneficial to us before. But I don't, with the way rates are going, no one's allowing you to buy
Yeah.
3-4 years in advance.
It-
Because I did see a 12-month quote, and the tradition brokers, I think that was almost 11 cents because they were expecting it to really start skyrocketing the following year.
Yeah. Yeah. The other concern I guess I had with the 12-month was, depending on the outcome of the solar
Right.
discussion, is that there's going to be some overlap there then as well. Won't there be? Like, are we just? Is there a need to have that extended contract?
Yeah. Yeah, we could probably also ask for like I'll talk to them, see if they'll give us some type of, maybe for another 1/100th of a cent.
Right.
The swing would be a maximum of 2 or 3% or something like that.
When do we sign the contract?
I could have signed it
But I mean,
yesterday or today
I
or
mean, when's the
whatever.
effective date? I'm sorry.
The effective date would be for June electric through December electric,
But if we did a year, it would be June through
through
the
May
end of
the
May.
following year.
of 2024. 2024. What affects, I mean, maybe Greenworks can answer that for us. What affects the timing? What would lengthen the construction schedule? Would you know, Dr. Herring, would you mind if I asked them what would lengthen a construction schedule? I know we're not here yet, but since we're talking about this, if you guys are okay with it, I mean, would a terrible winter, if there was more clearing that had to be done, what, you know, as we're looking at planning this out, if we go with solar, what would extend us out? Where right now this says December 31st. Obviously, we're a month out, so that would be more like January 31st. So we're talking about a 90-day window here, 90 to 120-day window. You know, what would make you feel as though you would need that extra 120 days?
Weather can always affect a construction schedule, so weather is definitely in the mix there. Our experience on recent projects, school and other projects that we've done over the last 6 months or so, is that with supply chain issues, it's always those last couple of pieces of equipment, the inverters and the switch gear that you need in order to connect the solar array and to turn DC into AC electricity, that are unpredictable in their supply. So we'll order all of those components immediately, but there's a long lead time on some of those pieces of equipment, and that's the wild card. So what we've been in the practice of doing over the last 6 or 8 months while we've been going through supply chain issues is putting a best guess estimate there, and basically keeping the district, in this case, really well aware month on month as to where key pieces of equipment are expected to come in. But Tim, it's really those key pieces that are the big question mark.
So Brian, back to you then. If we only did the 6 months and then we had to do the additional 4, we're going to be paying maximum rate for those 4 months.
That, or if we know in advance, you know, I always find out if you're at least 6 months out, you get a better rate than if you're 2 or 3 months out. So, you know, if we know that it's not going to be done to March or April, and sometime around January, February, we go out then for the additional months. You know, we don't wait to, we're stuck and have to go to market rate.
Thanks.
So do we have a decision? Are we going to do 6 or 12 months? What do we think?
I would say a minimum of 6 months. I can ask for maybe 9 months just to be safe.
If we can get a 9 month, that probably actually would be good.
Jason, if we did 12 and the system was up and running, we can still sell it. The energy still gets sold back to the grid. Isn't that correct? And how does that? Is that at the cost of? Do we get reimbursed for that, or is that the investors just enjoy the fruit of that labor?
The way that typically works, we've dealt with a lot of school districts who've been under 2 or 3 or 4 year contracts, and they're in the middle of that multi-year contract when we engage the solar array. And what we typically do is we'll take any termination fee that's the payoff out of that contract and build it into the pro forma that you've seen on the different options that we've shown you. Obviously, if that's avoidable in a case like this, that would be a great thing. And the way that works is that those contracts that have been expensive to get out of on the part of other districts are the ones where, honestly, they didn't negotiate them well up front. I worked on one 4 or 5 years ago in which the district was in the middle of a 4-year contract at 10.5 cents per kilowatt hours worth of electricity. So the provider was making a ton of money over the next couple of years. And when I had to buy that out, it cost a lot of money to buy it out because they were going to make a lot of money. In a case like yours, if you're negotiating your contract well, there shouldn't be that much of a termination fee to get you out if you need to get out.
Since we don't have the project approved yet, and it seems short-sighted to me to do anything less than a year, and we can worry about getting out of it when the time comes. We have an option here with them rolling it into their contract, and you go for the best rate for a year, and then take care of it later.
I would agree with that.
Okay.
Unless, Brian, you really feel that you can save us money by doing 6 months and rolling the dice. But either way, if you do lock in and we choose not to do the solar, then after 6 months you're going to be doing a long-term contract, and will the rates be higher? I mean, there's a lot of variables to look at.
What I can do is I can try to find out what the termination clause would be. Is because right now the existing contract we have, we would have been paying if we didn't use that, we'd still be paying it. That's why it was so cheap for the last 4 years. This one here, I asked for a swing and just for the 6 months, but I can see if I can get a quote for both of them on the same amount. We can have a little discussion before you decide. Yeah. Because either way, I said, no matter what the contract is, what I have that day is not going to be good the next day for the rate.
Right. Given that circumstances, I would be in favor of you in consult with Christie signing off on a deal for a year.
Right.
I would not be in favor of you signing off on a deal for 6 months.
Yeah, and I like I said before, I'd probably feel a little bit better if I went 9 months. Because then anything in the winter is going to be hard to.
If you go for a year, you got it.
Yeah.
If there's any weather hold-ups on the project, then we'll handle it.
So we'll see those options next meeting.
Okay.
All right.
And I'll have both of them on the same date, so I know we're comparing apples to apples.
Sounds good.
And then the next day I'll get.
All right.
Might not be the same person the next day because their rates change daily.
Yep.
So Bob was suggesting that once you make that decision, when he talks to you, that you guys can just decide right there on the spot. Is that what you're saying? That you don't have to wait until the voting meeting?
There's certain things that we have to trust.
Because at that point, they're giving you that amount, and you're saying if you wait longer, it's just going to go higher? Am I hearing that correct?
It could go higher. I just would like to know what, for budgeting purposes.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do we do?
Well,
But I'd also, I'm going to ask them right off tomorrow. I'm going to ask them for a sample contract and see if there's any wording in there that we have early termination clauses.
right, at this juncture, if I'm understanding, we need, the board has to give Brian approval, and this isn't a voting meeting, so the board can't vote to give him that authority
But we're going to need some type of motion
right.
for the
At the
voting
voting
meeting.
right,
That
right.
gives me authority to
To
enter into a
move forward.
contract. 'Cause
the day after the voting meeting.
Right.
Okay.
But we can get all three options at the voting meeting.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's where I was getting at, is that we'd see all the options.
And maybe we can, I guess in this case, it would be advantageous for us to make sure that this vote gets put in the agenda after the solar vote, because that could affect how we choose to do this,
Sure.
right?
Absolutely.
So I would just make sure that we because we could wind up scratching the whole thing and going into another 4-year contract. That could be an option too. So we should just make sure it's after the solar vote.
Truthfully, talking to the suppliers, no one wants to do a long-term contract
Yeah,
on
let's
electric
get
right now.
4 years is.
But it'll
They're
still
all
change
scared.
whether we do 6, 9, or 12.
Yeah.
1 year is definitely. I mean, electric rates are going to probably stay pretty high for at least the next year or two. Any other discussion? All right, item C. This is for the junior high school HVAC project. There is a presentation that will be given by Quandale Energy Solutions.
I'll just give preamble to this. In the capital improvement fund, we had talked about the junior high project and possibly starting it this coming year. I think you'd put $600,000 in this year's capital to get it started. But in the facility study, it was basically to replace the unit ventilators at the junior high, which are at end of life. One thing I asked the engineers to look at is that school has a high humidity problem, and I wanted to make sure if we do anything there, we're also addressing the humidity issues and let the engineers talk about it. And I have to apologize. I'm not apologizing for you. I like Sherry, but the main engineer had a family emergency, so Sherry's taking his place right now.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you tonight. As Brian said, my name is Sherry Laura Savage, and I'm the Senior Director of Business Development for Quandale Energy Solutions. Note that said that I was not an engineer. So I just wanted to quickly introduce you to our Energy Solutions team. We were selected via competitive selection in the 2020 year to be the Energy Solutions partner for Exeter Township School District. And the first project that we did with Exeter was right here at the Lausch building, replacing rooftop units. And I think the project went very well. As Brian said, the next thing that he tasked us with was looking at the junior high school and those humidity issues. So just briefly to introduce our team, Rob Strickler is the Executive Vice President of Quandale Energy Solutions, and I know he's been to some meetings in the past, maybe a face that you recognize. John Hayden is our Vice President of Construction and also our Director of Engineering, and that's the gentleman that had the family emergency, so he's not here. In the audience, we have Nick Bagdonis. He would be the Senior Project Manager on the junior high school project and moving forward. James Brophy, also in the audience. He's our MEP Specialist and Commissioning Manager. So next slide, please. So, as Brian said, there were a couple of challenges that we were looking at in the junior high school. First of all, the high humidity levels throughout the year. It wasn't just really isolated into one particular season. Also, erratic temperature control within the spaces. And one of the big things that Brian brought to our attention, and then we observed as we were walking through the junior high, is that dehumidifiers were being used in a majority, if not all, of the classroom spaces. And those present a maintenance issue, number one, but number two, because of the noise that is associated with their processes, it becomes a detractant for both teachers and students, so the noise becomes a problem. So because of those issues and what we observed when we walked through the facility, we did a data logger study which measured temperature of the room, outside air temperature, as well as the relative humidity percentages in a number of spaces. We selected 12 classrooms kind of randomly across both floors of the school. And next slide, please. This is a result of what those loggers showed. Now, in the chart to the left-hand side, you'll see that there's a gray box that surrounds down kind of in the middle of it. That is the target humidity range for a school or actually any facility. You'll notice there's three lines that you're seeing. One is the outside air temperature, which is that line that goes the lowest on the bottom. The solid blue line is the temperature within the space as it was measured by the data logger. And then that top dotted gray line is the humidity that we observed in that particular room. So that was a week's worth of logging. It's done in 4-hour increments. So you'll notice that the relative humidity is much higher than what one should be expected or what the target range would be. Also, if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, you'll see all of that spiking that's going up and down. That demonstrates that the controls within the unit ventilators are not able to achieve or hold a constant temperature. So it's constantly turning on, turning off, turning on, turning off. They call that hunting. Next slide, please. So this is another example. This was a room on the second floor, very similar results. Again, humidity levels high. Overnight space temperatures, it does appear that setbacks were working, but the space temperature was lower than one would have expected it to be, or what would be ideal to keep the humidity at bay. So next slide, please. So to summarize what those loggers told us, in many instances, overnight temperatures were cooling down to 63 to 68 degrees. degrees, which is much cooler than what it should have been doing during an unoccupied time. Again, the relative humidity was very high, ranging from 60 to 80%. Those are like summertime in Harrisburg kinds of humidity levels, and very noticeable as you walk through the space. Target range should be below 60 for relative humidity. As I said, it appeared that the spaces were following a schedule which included setting back temperatures during unoccupied times, but it wasn't able to do it consistently. And again, back to the erratic behavior of some of the graphs that we saw, it continued to hunt throughout the day. Again, a big distractant for a student or a teacher, as the temperatures are constantly fluctuating 2 to 3 degrees very often throughout the day. Next slide, please. So why do we care about what the relative humidity is? First of all, that picture was taken, and I believe it's within one of the classrooms. It's a little difficult to see, but you'll note that there are spaces where you'll see the tiles sagging. And as soon as we walk in a building, well, I won't say we, as soon as our engineers walk within a building and they see that, they know that there are humidity issues within that particular building or that particular space. So it creates an uncomfortable condition for, again, both teachers and students. And I don't want to say that we observe the M word, because the M word is really bad within a school, but it certainly is a risk that you would face if that's not brought under control. It can result in the costs that would be incurred with testing for that particular substance, and also the remediation that would have to take place if found, and property damage. Next slide, please. So this is a picture of a unit ventilator. The purpose of a unit ventilator is, and these are in all of your classrooms, so the unit ventilator brings in outside air, conditions it, pushes it out into the space. And if you look at the next slide, this is a picture of what the inside of those unit ventilators looks like. Now, John would have had a very eloquent explanation of all of the parts pieces within the unit ventilator, but you can see that, they are somewhat in disrepair, so there would be refurbishing that we could do. As Brian mentioned, initially the thought was that we would be replacing those unit ventilators, but because of, we were looking at cost constraints and how we could control costs to the district, it is possible for us to refurbish those units and get them, you may get another 20 years of life out of them. Next slide, please. This is the controller that was within those unit ventilators, and it was consistent throughout all of the spaces. And this is a controller that is obsolete. It's no longer manufactured. It does not have humidity sensors in it, so it can't adjust to rising humidity within a space. So if there was a failure, the only course of action you would have is to replace that unit ventilator on an emergency basis for that particular space. Next slide. Similarly, there are air handling units, I believe, that serve the library, and it's coming up on another slide. It's two spaces that serves, but that too has an obsolete controller in it. So again, if there was a failure, you would need to replace that unit. Next slide, please. So a summary of the proposed project, as we've been discussing with Brian, is to upgrade those obsolete controls, which includes all of those items that you see bulleted there, replacing control valves, actuators, dampers, and actuators and dampers kind of control the seal on the outside of the unit ventilator. Right now you're getting air leakage that's coming in, which is part of your humidity problem. So this refurbishing would take care of that. And also to provide variable frequency drives, or VFDs, on those air handling units. A VFD allows the fan speed to respond to occupants in a space or conditions going on within a space, and it also can be an energy saving component. again, this project isn't really being driven by energy savings, but there are savings to be had by using VFDs. We would integrate the new chilled water plant in place of that air handling unit that has the obsolete controls. We would demo that and connect it to your newer chiller system. And we would integrate the boiler plant into the new control system as well. Next slide. Provide new temperature sensors, new humidity sensors, new CO2 sensors. And what a CO2 sensor does is basically senses the amount of CO2 within a space, so kind of, collectively registering how many occupants are in that room and varying the temperature and all of the controls in the room to suit exactly what is needed as opposed to just running flat out. We would also provide CO2 sensors, again, an opportunity for some more energy savings, and new controls will help with that temperature control, so it's not hunting to hold control. And again, the upgraded system will offer some lower annual energy usage. Next slide. This is a picture. You have two boilers. They're both exact same age. They were put in 1994, so they're approaching 30 years old. 30 years is the expected lifespan of a boiler. Right now, yours are working fine, but it would be our recommendation that you would replace one of the two boilers with a new boiler so that there's redundancy. We don't know if your old boilers are going to go for another day or another 2 years. We have no idea. But if you replace one now, it would allow you to serve and use predominantly the newer, more efficient boiler. The second one would be more of a backup in the event that you had a failure. You would not lose, the boilers within the building. Next slide, please. Also, as I mentioned, it's the office and the library that air handling unit serves. We would be removing that. That too is a 1994 chiller, has R22 refrigerant in it, which is no longer produced. So again, it would result in an emergency replacement if that went down. And we would provide the new chilled water piping to connect that system to your newer chiller plant. Next slide.
Sherry, can I just mention?
You can.
That new chiller plant, that is how old?
James, do you know?
It's not that old, is it?
No, it's not that old.
The air conditioning, but they had an old plant which is in a separate basement under the office space, which they never connected to the new one. The new one could handle the whole building, but they never connected the offices and the library to that new one. So that's what they're talking about.
So this slide simply summarizes the refurbishment of those units within the classroom. So things like cleaning coils, cleaning the fan blades, confirming that dampers and seals are working properly. That would all be part of the project as well. Next slide. So that's just a recap of what we would expect to see. Again, gaining humidity control, gaining better temperature control, improving the resiliency that you have here within the junior high school. And there are annual energy savings to be realized of $8,400. Again, not a big driver for this project, but the driver really was to improve the indoor air quality at the school. And the cost to implement the project is $3.4 million. As Brian said, there are a couple of ways that the financing could be done, but there was money budgeted in the capital budget that could get the project started, the balance paid in the following year, and I think Brian's exploring some other funding. Next slide. That's my non-engineering talk.
Thank you.
I'll be happy to attempt to answer questions if anyone has any.
I just had a question about the boilers. So you mentioned the redundancy. So there is multiple boilers now. It's just that they're all older. They're past the 30-year.
Correct. Well,
So-
they're nearing 30 years. Yes.
Nearing 30 years. So even if one would go down, we have that redundancy now.
You do.
It would just be that one of the boilers, you would replace one of the boilers now to have a newer unit in place.
Correct. And you would gain, some marginal efficiency with doing that as well.
Okay, thank you. I had some questions for Mr. Fike, but I'll hold that.
All right. One thing when she said the M word, we don't have it. The only reason we don't have it is because we're running individual dehumidifiers in every classroom to make sure we don't get it. But that does create a lot of noise.
They're running individual what? I'm sorry.
Dehumidifiers. In every
Dehumidifier.
classroom.
Okay.
Basically during the summer you end up replacing 3 or 4 because I'll get a call from custodians, one's not working. It's like run over Lowe's, wherever, pick up another one because we do not want that to happen in that building.
Who empties those?
We have them right into the drain of the sink. You put them right on top of the sink and they sit there and the drain goes out the back. We don't have to empty them. I don't want to take that chance either.
So, I'll ask Mr. Fike. The question I have is how much have we already allotted in capital reserve to account for this HVAC project?
I figure it was going to be over a 2-year period. It was about 1.8 because that was just the unit ventilators. But the more I looked into it, and that's why the data loggers in the classrooms for most of the last year, it's not the unit ventilators I'm worried about. It's the humidity control in that building. And I've heard it from, we've had complaints before from teachers. We've tested. We've been lucky we haven't had the M word, and I'm not going to allow that to happen. But if you're just going to replace the unit ventilators and not, or fix the unit ventilators and not address the mold, I think it's throwing good money against bad things. You're going to do it right. And like I said, the only thing they've done is replace the air conditioner or chillers there. And even that, they didn't replace the one unit, which is 30-some years.
Have we gotten quotes from anyone other than Quandel?
Well, actually, we didn't go out to bid because we were looking at ESCO projects where we hire the ESCO agent, they go out and they get quotes from multiple vendors. And if we go out to bid, we're going to have to ask for fair wage, and it's a lot more expensive. And with the ESCO walls, energy saving projects or HVAC projects, that's one thing we're allowed to, I don't want to say avoid bidding, but someone else does a competitive bid, and then with the ESCO there is no change orders. Whatever the price comes in at that you agree to they're the contractor, we aren't. They run everything, they pay the contractors, they make, they get all the clearances, send us copies of the clearances, give us copies of the bonds, and, just like this building project. It probably would have been 3 times the amount because of when we did it, but the price had to be held.
How do we pay for it?
Capital Improvement Fund. But if we use that, we've only budgeted this year for $600,000. So I think we have some more talks or discussion on when to start this. If we go with the full project, it's going to all but wipe out the Capital Improvement Fund for the future. There are some grants that waiting that come out that we might be able to apply or get a certain percentage or a match for, which I'm hoping to start applying. But I have to have a shovel-ready project to go after the grants. So that's why I wanted to bring it here. And we've been talking about for months, but I wanted to get the final data logging and make sure everything was set, that we weren't missing anything.
Brian, my understanding is that when the ESSER program came out, that could be used for HVAC as a result of COVID. Can we use ESSER dollars for this?
There is some money in ESSER. We'd have to change our application. We still have time to do that. With that, though, we have to have the project, what we're going to do, and the board agrees to it. Then we send it to the state. The state says, okay, yes, you can use ESSER money, and then comes back, and then we can award the contract to. But it's,
About how much do we have that we could use possibly in ESSER?
I don't want to argue. About $1 million? A little bit less than that, yeah. 700,000.
Does that include what you've allotted for cyber?
That's separate.
That's separate. So this is 700 you
That's
have
not
left.
committed.
Non-committed.
So just make sure I heard correctly, 700,000 from ESSER funds, 600,000 around that we have.
I already have. I had about
capital.
1.8 total, so that's another 2.5, and then I think there was about 1.1 that was not committed in for anything in the future for rainy day fund for capital. You know, so I said if we did that, that'd be close to wiping out the capital fund. But there are the infrastructure bill, the new, whatever they call the last one, the application stuff come out for those, the federal funding bills, you know, which are competitive, which we could apply for too.
So you don't foresee us needing to issue new debt to cover this?
No, I'm not one for debt, but
Okay.
But I do see things like you know, I keep on hearing that our next project after this would be the junior high auditorium. You know? Yeah, I heard that laugh.
So
they've been talking about that how long?
Well, since I was a freshman member of the board in 2001.
We had talked about the new seats during budget. Is that what you're talking about? We potentially delay that again?
It wouldn't just be new seats because it's the mastic that's holding the tile on the floor has asbestos in it. It's not the friable. That's, you know, it's fine, but once you can't put new seats in without ripping the tile.
The entire flooring out.
Yeah. So that
but that is a part of it.
$400,000 project's now going to be about $700,000 or $800,000 because we're remediation.
You mentioned to modify us, you needed to have the board approve the project. Is that the scope of the project or a vendor for the project?
The scope of the project.
Okay.
Right.
What's your risk assessment if we wait a year?
As long as we keep on top of the dehumidifiers, yeah, I'd say 70% happy. I'm not happy that it's been waited this long because you saw pictures of that one classroom. If you go on the first floor hallways, you can see every single tile going.
Mm-hmm.
And that's you know that's why I'm making sure that they check the dehumidifiers every day or through their walkthrough because you know, this summer was a somewhat dry summer, but the problem with the unit ventilators, most people don't. There's the same things they put in hotel rooms, so each room has their own noisy heater. And, you know, the first couple of years are nice and quiet, but the older they get, the more loud they get. But the ventilator intake is right on, especially on the first floor, is right outside on ground level. Sometimes it's lower than ground level, and they put a window well out. Well, you're sucking all that moisture in first thing in the morning as fresh air. When I was at the previous school, they actually didn't like the vents that went outside, so they put bushes to hide them, and that bush just made more moisture come in. You know, so there we cut the bushes back, so we rather see the vent on the outside of the building than the bush hiding it that possibly cause mold coming in. My concern is we have this second boiler, yes. My concern is more the humidity and the air quality control.
Yeah, I think that's important.
And there are other grants out there for air quality control that we might be able to get because this is a shovel-ready project that's already been researched and everything. it'd be go through a lot faster than going out for the grant and not having something that you can't spend. And those grants, the federal grants that are out there, most of them have to be spent by 2025.
When does when does the ESSER funds expire? When do they have to be used by?
2025, 3.
So if this would get delayed a year, we could still use those funds.
But I do think that the biggest problem there is really a control project, not a heater project. The controls are not bringing in the fresh air when it's supposed to, or bringing too much air, or exchanging it properly. The units are either 100% on or 100% off, or variable speeds. You can control the volume coming in and out.
Have we had other materials get ruined because of the moisture? Like books or paper, electronics?
Not that I know of. We had that happen before at Jacksonville, but we replaced those systems over there. The library we had here this summer, we changed the AC system, but last year books were falling off the shelf because of the moisture. The pages would rot right off and they'd fall off the shelf.
I mean, if there's any possibility of mold, I think it should be addressed.
Well, there was mold at both the junior high and Jacksonville 10 to 11 years ago. It was remediated, and we had not had any problems since, but this is a good indication of what caused the problem at the time. At Jacksonville was because the age of building was before the new system was put in.
Yeah. So you're saying the new system that was put in mitigated the issue with the mold at the other schools?
What I'm saying is we had no mold at other schools other than the junior high school and Jacksonville.
Right. And
we remediated the mold condition at that time. It was not as all-inclusive as you might fear, but
and I think that's when they start putting in individual dehumidifiers in the classrooms at the junior high. At Jacksonville, that project was started 2018. And at the same time, they also did Lorraine, replaced all the unit ventilators, the rooftop units. They basically redid the systems, but they didn't add anything new. If I was here, I would have suggested doing air conditioning in the gym, but they didn't. When it cost that much more to do it that time. But right now, that's off the table in my book.
So, and just to be clear about the ESSER funds, the way the grant was initially written for the ESSER 3 funds, it could be used to do that type of system, but the grant wasn't written that way. So, Brian, we are actually going to have to go back to the state and ask them to reopen the grant to allow us to even do that. We are hoping, we expect that they will allow us to do that, but it wasn't originally written that way. It was written for academic resources and other provisions under the ESSER 3 funds.
Where it should be. Just to be clear. I guess I'm having a hard time because I'm a little sticker shocked. I mean, we went through an entire budget year last year, and this is the first I'm hearing about a price tag this big. And now we're kind of sitting here figuring out how we're going to do it. And we're going to be coming into budget time in 6 months, and we're going to have to figure out how to balance the budget. We're going to potentially clean out the capital fund, and then we're going to have to figure out how to refund it. So I just need to know, I'm having a hard time understanding how we do all this, how we protect the taxpayer, how we make sure that there's no educational loss, use ESSER funds. There's a lot of questions that I have on the table that I just feel like haven't quite been ironed out, except for a $3.4 million price tag that we didn't know about a year ago.
And truthfully, I didn't expect it to be that high because I was figuring it was just a ventilator replacement like you did at Jacksonville and Lorraine. But the more I looked into it, it was a control issue. It's not the units itself; it's the controls of the whole building. replace the units and keep on running dehumidifiers, but I don't think that's the right thing to do. And I'm not saying right now you say, yeah, we're going to do it. I just need some direction to go after grants and pursue other avenues to fund it. But I think if you know, it needs to be looked at over the next year or two, or at least started. Because the unit ventilators, I think if their end of life is right about now. They're still working, they're noisy, but they're still operable, and you can still get parts for them. One of the other options would be just to gut them and replace the innards, but it's not to control the humidity issues.
How much can we save by not replacing any of the boilers and just running off of the two existing ones that seem to be running fine currently? I know they're not energy efficient, but do we know how much could be knocked off by limiting the scope of what we're talking about?
We can ask the engineers, because that's you know, start at the top and go down. You know, but 5 years from now, you might be replacing both, or you know, you might be replacing one.
5 years. 5 years, we should be debt free though too. So that, you know, that's it's not exactly a.
And I'm not saying that there's nothing wrong with that, but probably it would have been cheaper when they put the new chillers in to disconnect the one that was doing the offices and library then, than to wait to now to rerun piping through the building to connect up. Because they bought a chiller that could run the whole building, but only hooked up 90% of it.
And Brian, if I might add here, at one point we did break out all of the components of the project. I don't have it with me, but that's something that I can send in to you again for distribution. But so the controls piece and this dollar value, boilers, this dollar value. And at one point, Brian, you talked about perhaps having internal maintenance staff do the refurbishment of the unit ventilators. So we had those three things broken out, which I can send to you.
Yeah, I can bring it to the next meeting. This is really a discussion meeting that.
Is this the one on page 12 though that says the DDC controls improvements and it's 2.984 million, and then boiler replacements 340,000, 3 HVAC equipment maintenance 110? Is that the numbers we're looking for?
Well, the 2.9 is what I like to break down.
Okay.
The boiler replacement, yeah, that's the one thing that's.
Sorry, I thought that was the question, how much the boilers were, so that's what I was trying to find
Yeah, so
for
that
you.
is a couple $100,000.
Right.
But it's also connecting the front chiller that's almost end of life to the new chiller that they put in that could handle the whole building. You know, and there's also probably money you could save instead of tearing it out, just abandoning it. That room's not going to be used to anything. It's a separate basement.
If it's an eventual need, I'm okay looking into it. I'm certainly okay with you trying to find grant money. I mean, I think that's great. But I would say for me, before I would be comfortable moving forward, I'd like to at least see some kind of a financial report on how we're going to structure it and how that's going to affect, you know, money that we need to bring in the future over the next couple of years, just so we can be prepared and understand what that looks like from my aspect anyway, especially as we come up on the budget coming up here in the next couple of months.
Yeah, that's, you know, the other thing you might want to look at, it's not that expensive, but you might want to look at having a outside non-district employee redo the facilities plan. Last one we had was 2018, and that's what the school board's been going off of, what has to be replaced when, and you know, those types of things, and that's why you did Lorraine, Jackson Wall.
KCBA, is that who
Well,
ran
they
the
did
last
the
one?
last one, but they also charge 8%, where mostly everyone else charges 6% for their fees. So, you know, we can have one of those done if you want. You know, the facilities plan's usually not that expensive. You know, 5,000-6,000 to update it and go through everything. That's, you know, sometimes I think it's better to have engineers do it than architects, because architects look for, you know, what they're going to get their percentage off of down the road on projects.
So-
But that's what our whole facilities plan has been, based off that KCBA report 2018. And, you know, in that report, they had to replace unit ventilators. My feeling when I looked at the building was, you gotta fix the humidity problem here.
One of our primary responsibilities to our taxpayers is to ensure that our buildings are maintained to the point where we're not facing tiles sagging in the roof and we end up having to replace that because we saved money by not replacing a heater unit or the modules. And you know, I've never had much patience. I used to have Jason's job at one time, and leaving things go normally results, you know, if I'd let my kidney cancer go, I'd be dead. So you don't put things off. You make a way to make it happen.
My concern is on teaching and learning. Do we have we've done a study on the humidity in the rooms. Have we talked with our teachers and the principal and the students and the parents to see what, if any, effects these problems are having on teaching and learning? What effects are they having on the kids' health and on teachers' health? Are we seeing more upper respiratory infections as a result? And this has been going on, I think somebody said 94 on one of the slides. That's a long time for these things to be festering. I'd be interested in a report on what, if any, effects on teaching and learning this problem is having.
So I think that's a good question. I don't know that that's data that we could really gather, because people get sick, kids get sick, teachers get sick. We're just coming off of COVID. So I don't know that the humidity issue contributed to the absences that we have, and oftentimes people don't tell us why their students are absent, and teachers aren't required to tell us, you know, why they're absent. So we wouldn't really know that information. I can tell you that having walked through the junior high, it does feel damp in there when you go in, and when you go into classrooms, it can be noisy. Having been the principal at Lorraine that had similar issues with humidity, having had dehumidifiers in every room, that does get noisy, and it's often difficult for people to hear. So, you know, I'm not sure about the health component, but I can tell you from the impact of instruction that it can be it creates noise, and it can be a distraction. Yeah. I'm not sure. I was just looking to see if I still had the KCBA report from years ago. I don't know if this current board has seen a copy of this report.
I think, Brian, you have a copy of it.
I do think it might be helpful for you to see the report that was done a number of years ago, since many of you are new to the board, and you can see the projects that were recommended back in about, I think it was even before 2018, if I recall. So a lot of them are outstanding and have been put off, and some have been done, and some have been prioritized, and so I think it would be helpful for you to see that report, and we can get that to you.
So, unless there's any other discussion, I don't believe we're planning on moving this to the voting meeting. This is just a discussion item at this point.
This is a discussion item,
Okay.
yeah, because I think I said during budget last year, you know, I was hoping to start this project sometime this year, but only a small amount. But until I knew exactly what the scope was going to be, you know, at that time I said, you know, we were looking at unit ventilators had to be replaced, but I was also concerned about the humidity, and now have the data logging and everything else.
How soon do you need the information for the ESSER fund grant?
I can apply as long as I don't need a vote on that. You'll have to, when we do the budget revision, we'll have to just republish it for the public to be able to see. But
Right.
I just don't. Our administration will not just go in and change something unless the board knows about it or gives the okay to go for that. Same thing, I won't go apply for grants of something we're not going to use.
Yeah, I mean, my recommendation would be we come to the next meeting, whether that's a voting meeting or the next Cal meeting, with an itemized list of things and their costs and what we think we could potentially descope from that to at least tackle at a later time.
Right. Now, I'll send all the board members the link or the KCBA report, the PDF. It's pretty large, so depending on your emails capability, you might just want a link. And we'll try to get some breakdowns on the other numbers. Sorry, if John would have been here, I would have known those off the top of his head, right?
He probably would have.
No. And the KCA report, there's other things in there, as Christy knows. There's issues with their flooring in Lorraine. Before I replace the hallway floorings, I'd like a structural engineer look at them, because when you look down the hall, there's a wave, and usually that means there might be water issues underground, but I'm not an expert on that. So,
That's at Lorraine?
At Lorraine.
Okay.
Can we maybe have that at one of our meetings where you come to us with what is left on the priority list for that, as opposed, you can send us the report and I can look at it as to whether I'll completely understand it, but to have a narrative behind what you're seeing is important on that might be good for the board to hear in the public. Can we do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think when I did the capital presentation at other projects I did that were from that report in the near future, but I didn't assign anything, because sometimes when you have architects do things, they look at, okay, it's 15-year life. At the end of 15, you're going to replace it, just like you heard from the athletic director. Oh, they say that the turf is good for 15 years, but I know places that go on 18, 20, 22 years before they replace it, because it really doesn't that worn down. And as long as it's maintained each year, new rubber and stuff in it. So, when you get close to those time frames, I start looking at it. And I'll also send you, we do have a roof replacement report when they have to be done. Keep track of that.
Is there any way that when we get, and I appreciate the everything that was done here, and I do appreciate the amount of humidity in the junior high. But when I get this type of, again, the sticker shock and all this type of thing, is there any way that prior to we can have a list of, say, this is what I'll be pulling from the capital fund, this is how much I'll be pulling, this is how much we can get in grants that I can apply for, this is, is that not possible to get ahead of time? Like, I can apply for X amount of grants, not saying I'll get them, but I can apply for, this $40,000 grant, or this particular grant, or we have this, because I don't know exactly how much we always have in the capital fund and how much we always have in those types of funds, not being on that particular committee. So I mean, the how we're paying for it is the huge deal for me too, as with Tim. And so if not just seeing the presentation, but then also seeing this is how we plan to pay for it, that would really go a long way in making me feel a lot more comfortable with, oh, okay, I understand. Yes, this does need to be done. These kids do need, we need to have a good work environment, and this is how we plan to pay for it. Because otherwise, there's no way I can vote for something like this without knowing all of those. So perhaps with our next, whenever we have another thing like this, we can also have the money structure, like, you could tell us how do we plan on paying for this exactly, type of thing, or what we can, here are the possibilities, give us X, Y, or Z, just in the future.
Sure.
if that's okay.
Yeah, it's just, like I said before, it's totally different from what I talked to last year. When I started looking at the junior high project from KCAB report, all we had to do was replacing the ventilators. But when I walked through the buildings, I saw the sagging ceiling tiles, and just knowing that we were running dehumidifiers 24/7 there all summer and during the day in classrooms.
Am I confused then? Because I apologize for cutting you off, Mr. Fike, but those pictures that we looked at, weren't those the unit ventilators? I thought that's what that said. So we are replacing the insides of the unit ventilators, correct?
We're not
Refurbishing. Okay. So you
refurbishing,
thought we were
not
going to
buying. The KCBA report was
Said
looking
we'd
at
be
just
buying them.
new ones like we did at
Right.
Jackson Lorraine.
So this is even less than what we thought we'd have to do.
It's a control issue. It's not the unit issue there. It's a control
Right,
issue.
right. So, okay. I just wanted to make
Dampers
sure
aren't-
that what you
dampers-
said, I wasn't confused with
What
what you
happens
said.
with
Just
contr-
making sure.
What happens with controls, it allows a little bit air in,
Right.
closes them off, but there is no humidity control on those units, so it's
Right.
either open 100% or closed 100%.
Understood. Thank you. And thank you very much.
So it sounds like from that discussion, there's some takeaway items, but it definitely seems like it would be beneficial to have some kind of capital project rundown at a future meeting here. Okay. Thank you. Okay, moving on to item D. This is for an amendment to the agreement with BCTC. This would be effective July 1st, 2023, and this is essentially making it so that each participating school district would bear their own costs for transportation.
Last year during the budget season, BCTC was going to drop transportation completely, and it would have been the district's responsibility to take it on this year. The superintendents, along with the business managers, fought that big time and told them that was too late to give us a heads up in April that we'd have to come out with their own transportation, and we were having the same issues as they were. So they agreed to hold it off another year. But this is basically saying that next year we're going to have to transport our own students, and it's an agreement that we understand it's an amendment to the original agreement with the BCTC.
And
Ben knows that we have to add buses next year.
where are we is this
From the high school
from our
to-
school to
both Berksville or Career and Technical Institute over in Bern Township, and also I think we have one or two that go to the Ole campus, Ben, right? That we will be transporting them ourselves instead of the BCTC bus, both morning and afternoon.
So there's a savings for BCTC in the
But there's additional costs.
But there's
Well,
additional costs on our side. For
Now, supposedly the tuition will be paying less because the tuition we pay now includes transportation.
Right. But we don't have an idea where that nets out yet.
We won't see that net until January.
Okay.
Right.
So if we vote no, they'll still give us transportation. I kind of laugh because
That's correct.
We're voting on something that's going to happen whether we
Basically-
vote or not.
Basically, you're acknowledging that they're giving us no choice. Unless you can get all the board members, which is someone from each district. Who is our board representative?
That's how it works with the budget too.
So, John, what's the answer if we vote no? Did I have that right on the agreement? Okay.
Any other discussion? Okay, moving on to item E. This is something we've never seen before. This is the Greenworks proposal. We do have Greenworks here to give an updated presentation.
Brian, do you have the other slide deck that I had put on the, there's one that's the Exeter option update that I had done.
Joe? Let's go get it. That one?
There you go.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Good to be back in front of you again. Jason, thanks for breaking the ice on the our petition. We had last week received a number of follow-up questions from the board on different pieces of our conversation over the last several months. One of the things that, or actually the first question that was asked was a question that asked us to go back and revisit a couple of different options, which is what this particular slide deck is all about. So if you'll go to the next slide, please, Joe. I actually was asked to look at 3 options, and I've added a 4th, which I've called option 1. I'll show you the other 3 options in a minute, but the 4th that I added was what I consider kind of what's currently on the table, or what's currently been on the table, and that's the 110% offset 5.6 megawatt array that would be at Owatton and at Rifton, as you see on the slide. So this is an array that, assuming we would put it up in this fashion, that's about $29 million worth of savings over the 40-year life of the project, and that's assuming current electricity cost with a 2% annual increase. That would lock you in at 3.4 cents per kilowatt hour average cost of solar generated electricity over the next 40 years. And all of the options, including this, would include the 30% federal investment tax credit, which is stepped up, if you remember, from the 26% federal credit when we originally started this conversation. And that was one of the requests that we got, was to make sure 30% was built in. So that's option 1.
How close is that to, so that top left section of the 5.1, how close is that to the road, to Route 562?
There are setbacks that are required, and it would meet those setbacks, but it's, you can kind of see it on the slide, it's up essentially nestled against the road.
And then all the way to the left, I believe there is what appears to be a evergreen privacy screen that those lines that are about halfway down start to go through.
Yep.
And that becomes, how close is that to the property owner all the way to the left?
I can't give you an exact number there. There's obvious code setbacks that we would follow, and we could back that up a little further if you chose to do that. But one of the things that we have modified in the draft of the contract that I've sent to Sharon is a clause in the contract. I actually split out the couple of things that we've discussed over the last couple of months and included them in the contract as Exhibit A1. Exhibit A in the contract is the layout of the array, and we'll have to finalize that once a decision is made if you decide to go forward. Exhibit A1 covers 2 things. One, the mature plantings so that they'd be adequate for screening the array from any neighboring parcel without being put into place in such a way as to shadow the array, which only makes sense. The other thing that I included in Exhibit A1 is the fencing stipulation. That was one of the things that had come up in our conversations. So those are really the only 2 other things that we had still been discussing, so I split them out into the contract in Exhibit A1. The issue is where you want to place the array, and that's what these 4 options are about that we're staring at now. Any other questions about that one? And again, this is kind of what I consider the current on-the-table proposal that we've been discussing. And then part of this exercise this evening is to review the other 3 that last week we were asked to go back and revisit.
And I believe one of the options doesn't have that snippet of solar panels at Owatton in the front near the road.
That's correct.
Which brought it down to maybe 4.6.
It brings it down from 5.6 to 5.1 to 100%
in that
offset.
in that example.
Yes,
Yeah.
to 100% offset versus 110 in this case.
Right.
So if we can go to the next slide, I'll show you option 2. There it is. So this is basically identical to option 1, with the exception of dropping the piece of the array away that's on the road or near the road on the west side of the building. This is a 5.1 megawatt array that's 100% offset instead of the 110% offset. $26 million worth of savings estimated at current electricity pricing plus the 2% increase per year over the 40-year period. This takes your cost of electricity generated via solar up slightly to 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. And again, this is at a 30% federal tax credit included. One of the things I wanted to mention in all of these options is that you have an opportunity in these cases to be able to lock your electricity cost in this case at 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour, which is about a third to a quarter of the number that Brian is currently talking to your brokers about. And you've got the opportunity in this case to lock your electricity cost in for the next 40 years at, let's say, a third of the cost that you're seeing in the next 6 or 9 months worth of a brokered electricity cost. To me, that's a significant piece. That you've got the opportunity to lock one of your major expenses for the district in, and an expense that's got upward volatility, I think by anyone's estimation. You've got the opportunity to lock that cost in at a fraction of your current cost for the next 40 years. So next slide, if you would.
Before we go on to the next slide, can we just go back right there? I think we had, somebody question how much is this going to cost the taxpayer per year?
Yep.
And if I were looking at this slide right here, it would not cost the taxpayer anything. It's going to save the taxpayer $330,000 per year.
That's exactly correct, Allison.
Okay.
And again, the way that we structure these projects is that you as a district really can't take advantage of the 30% federal tax credit, nor can you take advantage of the 85% first-year depreciation on systems. Those are significant federal tax benefits for these sorts of things. An investor group would own, operate, maintain the array for an initial 5-year period. You'd have the opportunity to buy the system out after that 5-year period from those investors. They have to hold for 5 years or they forfeit that 30% federal tax credit back to the Treasury. You've got the opportunity to buy out, but at that point, you've got a system that's somewhat depreciated. You can 100% finance the buyout of the system, which means that you're really not coming out of pocket with any upfront cash at the buyout period at that point. Long story short is we try to set solar projects up for schools and for not-for-profits as nothing more than a 40-year annuity, where from the day that we turn the system on, you're going to start to save money. In this case, you can see the savings on the screen, $330,000 for year one. I listed it here as years 1 through 5, depending on when your electricity rates would shift. And then after you would buy the system out, those savings double to about $600,000 a year.
Yeah.
And also to point out, Mr. Fike said in year 6, we have the possibility that we could buy the entire system ourselves because the rest of our debt service would be down. We wouldn't have it. So that year, again, we wouldn't have to raise taxes to purchase the whole system because we would have that already built into our budget from past debt service, basically.
Correct. Now, the one thing also to note, though, to be fair, the savings, we also incorporated the time value of money. So even if we bought it out of not having to raise taxes or, from the money we're saving from not having the debt service, I still incorporated, like we loaned that or borrowed that money, because that would be time value of money, because that $6 million or $7 million could have been a bank collecting interest. So, but truthfully, that's why we came out with the 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour, because that's time value of money. But you won't be paying that 3.5 cents because you're not paying debt service if you pay it right off.
And Allison, one quick correction, what you said a second ago, you wouldn't have to raise taxes in order to generate the cash to buy the system out. That $600,000 a year is shown after principal and interest on a reasonably expected loan are accounted for.
Some of the confusion also I've heard from some in the community that have commented, well, of course, we're paying money for this as a contracted service payment from years 1 through 5. The thing that I think is eluding some people is that that contract service payment is in place of what we'd be paying for our electricity bills.
What is that?
The amount of the electricity bills. So what we look over 600,000 is what we're currently looking at.
What is our say next year's projection for electricity bills?
If
lock
I
in
was
it.
at 7.2, we'd be about 750,000. If I was at 9, we'd be 8 or 900,000. 9 cents a kilowatt hour.
Yeah.
So if we don't
now,
do,
well, we're still now. That's not our total electric bill because we still have the line charge and taxes that we still have to pay to Med Ed. Because one of the people asked me, well, what happens if electric goes out, or at night? It's a two-way meter. Whatever we don't use during the day is put back on the grid and sold to the grid. At night, we're pulling back off the grid because we don't have batteries. It's basically whenever it's generated. So we still have to have lines between the buildings. We don't have dedicated lines from Awatin to Losh or to the high school. It goes back out to the grid, and the current laws allow us to use that excess we send out to the grid to go against the existing building before Med Ed can charge us.
Right. So
And
do we
then
know
if
how much we pay though right now per year?
Right now,
in electric?
well, what we will be paying, because right now per
That's
year
fine.
we're paying 3.625.
Right.
The lowest I've gotten is double that, and
Which
further
is
out
per
they're saying
year.
it's going to be like 11 cents.
Okay, but right. So per
right
year.
now, based on that, we'd be about 750,000.
Okay, so 750,000, and you are saying that because we have to stay connected, which I totally understand. Do you know what that cost will be in addition to what he's talking about?
I just added them all up, and it's about 4,000 a month.
Okay, so I can multiply.
Now
that.
that's
So I just that's
if
just
we
an
go
addition.
100%. If we don't go 100%,
Right.
our smallest building won't be covered, which is Lorraine.
So
And
100%,
that's
and it's
also-
$4,000
That's less
per
than
month.
10% of our electric use. That's why we can do 100.
No,
No.
that's why I
No,
wanted
that's-
to
that's
write it
for
down.
taxes.
Yes, this is for
Strictly
tax and
comparing
keeping it. Yes.
Electric usage. I'm not comparing
Okay.
line charges because, Med Ed can up the line charges, or the state can add additional taxes.
Okay, so that's $48,000 per year.
Right.
And currently we are paying $750,000. This is all included in $750,000
No, that's
per
just the
year.
electric cost.
Yeah.
That's
so,
what just the electric usage cost would be. We
So
still
we
have
pay-
that 48,000 on top of that.
Okay, so next year we're looking at $798,000
Correct.
in electricity bills to Med Ed, correct?
Correct.
About.
Well, it's Med Ed and Direct Energy.
Right, I
or
get. Yeah,
whomever we
I'm
pick,
sorry, but yes. Okay, just wanted to make sure I had that clarified. Thank you.
so
And
but
again, if I may, I want to make sure that everyone understands that the $330,000 a year's worth of savings in years 1 through 5 on the screen are after you've paid your contract service payments, and the $600,000 a year's worth of savings from years 6 through 40 are after principal and interest payments have been made. So those are really free cash net savings in those years as it's shown on the screen.
Okay, so I just want to point out though that if we didn't do this project, is there going to be an additional cost to the taxpayer next year?
Yeah,
Yes, there
because
would be because of
Well, because our rate is doubling, if not
Correct.
tripling.
okay.
And I said this before. I don't care what you think about green energy or whatever. It's not a green project to me. It's a cost saving project. It's something that if you do, it's a long term cost saving. It's not just a once and done. It's every year, because I don't think we're going to turn off electric to the schools. And we've already put in LEDs in all the buildings. The only thing that doesn't have LEDs and it's not cost effective to do it would be the stadium. But I've been at a district that we had LED stadium lights, and I couldn't believe how little it cost us to run those lights.
I just wanted to point out that this right here, as proposed, is not costing the taxpayer additional money.
Correct. Just
Oh, so
committing,
just the opposite.
it's
It's
committing
saving-
our rate for the next 40 years.
it's actually potentially saving taxpayers the kind of money that's on the screen.
Brian, what is, I know we've been over this 15 times, but once again, what is under those arrays? What are we doing with that land under those arrays and that option right now? Is any of that grass being used by students or teachers or administrators?
No, at Awatin, I can tell you, Mr. Quinn and I took the gator up through, and it's a bunch of briars and high grass at the top. At the lower end, we cut half of that, and the other half, the farmer next door cuts it every like 30 days. I'm not sure if he bales it or whatever, but it's basically just growing up at the lower half.
So nobody's playing soccer on that?
There's a field.
Not on that one. They have a field on the other side.
Directly behind it, and that's not.
Yeah, if you look at the green rectangle, that's a soccer field that kids play on. And then next to it, it's kind of not as green. That's a baseball field, but I'm not really sure I've heard of anyone really playing baseball on it, other than maybe recess.
And
So,
actually,
but
I think
behind
under
that-
both the soccer and baseball field is our, what do they call it? Geothermal fields underneath those.
Yeah, with any of these configurations, I'm not aware of it interrupting or taking away from any youth activities.
I know when I took Mr. Quinter up through there, that one field, we bounced around a lot because there's a bunch of rocks in that area. It's never really leveled out.
Thank you.
And another point along that line is that for ground mount arrays like these, the way this works is we're going to come in, if you would move forward, we would come in and drive a series of posts into the ground, and that's what's going to support the array. But those posts are not concreted or any other mechanism secured into the ground. They're driven into the ground. At the end of the useful life of the array, they can be pulled right back out of the ground, and you can restore that ground back to what it looks like now. So if we can go from here to option 3. Option 3, the request was to go back and revisit the original plan, which originally showed this array, or this sort of an array, on the east side of the Awatin building. I've actually shown in the lower picture there what the array originally was proposed at. It was a 3 megawatt array that would have offset 65% of the district's electricity. When we did a site visit here several months ago now, and our engineering group looked at the ravine that's on the east side there where the array is shown, we basically tracked down exactly that middle area of the array that you can see we've omitted in the upper picture that was originally shown in our initial layouts in the lower picture. We had to omit that because the slope got too steep in that area to be able to put an array in there. So the 65% offset that we originally had proposed after our engineering site visit dropped down to 42%. And Joe, if you wouldn't mind backing up to the option 2 again, you can see that we've used that smaller array on the east side of the building in all these other options. I've updated that for all the other options that would have included an Awatin layout. So if you go back to the following slide, then yep. So this is 42% offset of the district's electricity usage. Your savings drop significantly down to 10.7 million versus the 28.9 million of option 1. Your average cost of electricity doesn't go up all that much in this case. It goes up to 3.7 cents versus 3.3 or 4 or 3.5 in the other two options. But the significant thing is that you're only going to be offsetting 42% of your electricity, and that other 58% of your electricity that you're still going to buy from brokers is hanging out there. So it's subject to the conversation you were having before we started the solar conversation this evening. But this is a viable option, only 42% of your offset though. Yeah. Above the array, yep. That's the, yes, exactly. And Brian, you may be able to speak to that. Is the question, why wouldn't we put an array area there? Brian, you may be able to speak to that better than I. If it's a north slope, and honestly, I have not been in that area, but if it's a north slope, it's really difficult to get an array to work efficiently on a north slope. Obviously, I'm depending on sunshine here, and on a north slope, I'd have to go to an expensive installation in order to get those panels up high enough that they'd still be in the sun.
Kind of going along the lines of the maximum efficiency. So then the savings or the cost flow analysis that we looked at. Obviously, there's output that's listed in there, and it degrades by I think 0.5% every year. How can you speak to how accurate that output is based on things like weather conditions and everything else?
Great question. All of the analyses that you're seeing on the screen, if you look at the lower left corner of each one of those pictures, you'll see the logo Helioscope. Helioscope is actually the solar analysis application that we use to do all of the analyses that you've shown or that you've seen here. We use this for rooftops. We use it for ground mounts like this. We use it for all of our layout. The way that Helioscope works, and it's a standard tool in the industry. There's two primary tools that do this. Helioscope is what we use. The other is called Aurora Solar that does fairly similar sorts of things. In a case like this one, or in any of our cases that we look at, we put the longitude and latitude or the address of where we're going to do the layout into the system. It goes to that location. It shows us your land and your buildings in a Google Earth kind of a format, if you will. It allows us to do the layouts that you see on the screen on that Google Earth canvas. It knows then, by definition, what the historic weather has been at that longitude and latitude where we're designing, and it uses those historical weather data to predict what the weather's going to be moving forward at that location, and it then predicts the output that you're going to see off the system based on historical weather data. It has never let us down. I think I mentioned earlier in this room that we, Greenworks SRE, Solar Renewable Energy, have done just south of $250 million worth of projects since 2010. We've never had one underperform. And it really is because of the predictability built into the way that this thing generates these layouts.
And if it would happen to underperform, the minimum biennial output that's listed in the contract, which covers 85%, would Greenworks would make us whole, at least for as long as it's contracted.
That's correct. Exactly.
Once we buy out the system, we're on, kind of on our own in terms of that. But okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
The other thing I should mention there is that I think we've talked about this in the past too, that there's a 30-year power output warranty on each panel that will be installed. If any panel in the system doesn't produce at least 80% of its rated output that we'll install it at over a 30-year period, it's hard to find a 30-year warranty on anything anymore. If it doesn't produce at least 80% of what its rated output is, the manufacturer will replace that panel free of cost. I think I mentioned too that we put up somewhere south of 1.5 million panels over the last 12 years that we've been doing solar development. Of those 1.5 million panels, we've had to replace 6 panels, and those 6 panels we had to replace because a commercial lawnmower threw a rock at a panel and broke it. So it wasn't that the panel failed on its own, we helped it fail, or a maintenance crew helped it fail.
Who owns Helioscope?
That's a great question. I'll have to look that up. Helioscope is an internationally used application for solar analysis. I'll have to look that up and find out exactly who.
I can look it up.
Yep.
Thank you.
Great. But it is a very, very commonly used solar analysis tool worldwide. Let's go to the next slide. This was the last option that was requested. This is both sides of a Watton. This then drops Riften out and replaces the Riften array with that piece of the array that lays along the road there. So it's just kind of an either or. This also is a 5.1 megawatt array that would offset 100% of the district's electricity use. So your savings are the same as that other option that included Rifton, but not along the road here. Your estimated cost of electricity is 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour. This one's kind of a little bit of a variant on the other option that you saw a minute ago. So those are the three options that you'd requested last week that we go back and revisit. And then I added that option 1, which is kind of the option that's been on the table over the last month or two.
Any other questions for Doug?
I'd sent a list of emailed items. I know that some of them were answered within the contract. One was about the screening. One was increasing the connectivity up to $250,000. I saw that one in there. The last one was about a sliding scale on a reduction % by year, and I did not see a response to that.
There was a response to that via email. The response there is that we have been, over the last couple of months, hanging on to our pricing on this project in the face of interest rate increases, which are a real cost to us in the project, and in the face of component costs that have gone up. We've hung on to our pricing, but our margins, honestly, Tim, we try to keep our margins very reasonable on these projects, and we do a lot of volume, is the way we do this business. So the kinds of decreases in costs that were requested, honestly, just aren't in the business model. We are hanging on to our pricing because the last thing I wanted to do in the middle of these conversations over the last couple of months is drop the bomb in the middle of the room that, oh, by the way, we're going to have to take our pricing up, a couple of % on the project. We've held on to our project pricing, but I can't offer those kinds of additional cost savings to exit.
So even if not at that rate, there's no counter that you're willing to offer at this time?
Well, the offer is that I'm hanging on to the pricing that was quoted before a lot of the cost increases and interest rate increases happened over the last couple of months. And honestly, that's a little bit of squeeze.
So what you're saying is that if we choose a different option, which is going to require a different agreement, that it's going to include all the additional costs that you're speaking of now?
What do you mean a different option with a different agreement? Sorry.
Well, if we go with a different option than we have now, we're going to require a different agreement, correct?
The relative cost of the system per watt will stay the same. We're going to hang on to that pricing. If you would change from a 5.6 megawatt array in option 1 to a 5.1 or to a, I forget what the option 3 number was, it would still stay the same per watt of energy installed. It would scale because of the scale of the project, but we would hold our unit pricing.
And since you've given us this agreement, what is the estimated cost that's an increase to you guys that you're not including in this contract?
I'll have to go back and look at the numbers. I'll get you an answer on that.
Okay.
Since no one has been impressed by the fact we're using our last available construction space nor the high temperature housing turnover in town, and really I have nothing against this project except for using my damn field.
Appreciate that.
But
that is called the Quinter Field, by the way.
Since well, I appreciate the cost of land more than a lot of people. Since no one is impressed by that, I did some other research on electromagnetic fields.
Okay.
I understand that the panels themselves are not a source, but more.
That's correct.
Likely the inverter or the converter or whatever you call it.
Transmission. Yep.
The World Health Organization, a study in both Australia and Europe, indicate that there is a electromagnetic hypersensitivity, and I've actually seen this with a lady I was showing a house to that happened to be near a transmission line.
A high tension line.
Right.
Yep.
And they have evidence that that is a potential from the solar panels or from the solar field. Additionally, there's indications of brain cancer in children, which again has not been. Their last thing on this study was additional research is also needed. So it's only been around for about 10 years, and there's really no substantive studies on the EMF causing the brain cancer, but they're studying that now.
I understand.
And I've got my kids totally surrounded by panels.
The first solar panel was sold commercially in 1954. Commercial solar is older than I am, and I'm starting to get up there a little bit. Yeah. So it's been around since 1954. There are a lot of data on solar in general and on the technology. I'm very deep in the weeds on this stuff. I'm not aware of an EMF problem coming from the panels themselves. High tension, high voltage transmission, absolutely. But I'm not aware of any issue that is created by the arrays themselves.
The array itself is not a problem.
Yes.
I grant you that. They said the converter that converts it from DC to AC
yes.
is where where they're getting the electromagnetic.
Sure. Anytime you're going to move a lot of energy around, you're going to have a field around that. That's going to be local to that piece of equipment, but the array that's around a building like that one is not going to create a magnetic field or an electromagnetic field that's going to influence the building at all. It might be an inverter, it might be the transmission of that electricity into the building, but you're pushing electricity into the building now and seeing the same kind of effect because of energy that's being transferred.
But we don't get DC from Med-Ed.
Right, but I'm going from DC to AC at the inverter right next to the array. That transmission or that inversion happens before we then transmit that electricity to the buildings. So that would be a remote inversion from DC to AC, and then the AC would be transmitted to the building.
The World Health Organization is recommending things like EMF shields on the homes. In other words, just like any radiation, it's not confined to the machine itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm
Mr.
less than 2% of our budget. We're using my field and destroying any option of expansion.
That's not true. We're not destroying any option of expansion. There's other places on the district we can expand.
No,
we may be destroying it there.
There is in Lorraine. There is no. I gave you 2 instances of 21 acres, 8 parcels. You cannot build south of Watton because it's all agricultural protection. I reviewed every site in Exeter Township.
What about
here?
here?
Build over across from Walmart because there's a high tension wire that runs down through. Where else?
Why? But what about here? What about here? What about this property?
If you want to tear it down, rebuild.
So you could potentially, sometime in the next 40 years, tear this building down, expand it through existing property, and build a larger facility. So there are places that we can build.
No. If you maintain what you got. There is no outside space other to build. Unless we want to get the state to give us the silt basin down below Neversink or down below the funeral hall. The graveyard.
After 5 years, if we decide that we don't, say we're not getting out what we wanted of it, and we decide to pull up stakes and say we're done and turn it back into Bob's Field or whatever they're talking about, what is there any cost to us after 5 years? Once we've done the 5 years with the stakeholders, what's the cost of us getting out of it at that point?
Yep. Well, it's all anticipated in the contract. There's a schedule in the contract as one of the attachments that shows what the buyout cost is at year 5, at year 6, at year 11, at year 16, and so on. To look at a situation in which you'd want to take the array completely back out of the ground after 5 years is not anticipated in the contract, because that would be an expensive exercise that, once you've got an array like this that's up, and it's not an inexpensive array that the investors are going to fund on the front end in order to let you achieve the cash savings that you're seeing, in my mind, there really wouldn't be a reason to take the array prematurely out of the ground unless, like Bob said, there was some driving need to take part of the array out of the ground to do a construction project or something. Once you've got an energy system like this that's installed and operating, and we've got a lot of historic data on those systems that they're going to continue to perform, I don't think there'd be any financial initiative or financial incentive to take it out of the ground prematurely.
Right, I understand that, and I appreciate what you're saying.
Yeah.
But considering it's only been like 12 years since we've been doing this, and who knows what'll happen tomorrow, but so I'm able to look in here and find out after 5 years if we decided to take this out of the ground, it would tell me how much it was going to cost me.
No, again, that's not taking it back out of the ground midstream in the contract is not anticipated in the contract. Your purchase cost at different points over the 28-year period is shown in a schedule in the contract, but that's your cost to purchase the system,
right?
So that you can continue to generate electricity from the system and take advantage of the electricity savings.
So I have that.
Yes.
Or demolish it ourselves if we purchase it.
If you want to, you could do that.
Okay, so if we decided to pull up the system for whatever reason, we're paying for it. We have to pay for the system and pay to remove it. Is that correct?
You'd have salvage value area that you could use to offset the cost to take it back out of the ground.
But we would be paying
unless we do not buy out the system. If we keep the system contracted for 28 years, you would be obligated to take
that is covered in the contract.
At 28 years?
It's a 28-year.
Thank you.
Contract. Yep. But again, I don't think there would be any. I don't think there'd be any reason after year 5 to take the system back out of the ground. At that point, you're saving. You're ready to save $600,000 a year with only 2% electricity increases from now until that 5-year period.
So, do you have anything in your book of facts?
Yep.
And I know you don't have it tonight, that would indicate the strength of the electromagnetic field around this particular array.
I don't.
Okay.
I'm not standing here. I don't. I don't believe that the panels themselves are EMF generators.
I've conceded that.
Yep.
It's the
inverter.
Even in the article, in the article I read, it's the inverter that puts out the electromagnetic field.
Yes, but the inverter is a box that's maybe as big as the podium that converts the DC to AC. It is not an array that is surrounding a building like that one.
Where's the inverter at?
I don't know where the inverter would be in a layout like this one. Actually, assuming that the district would sign a contract for the system, one of the next things we would do would be to get our engineering, electrical, and mechanical engineering team out here to start doing a really thorough site review. Look at your electrical rooms in detail, look at the array locations, look at where inverters would be located, do all of that fundamental kind of analysis work in preparation for our electrical design so that we can then submit that for approvals and move forward. But that's something that, we can show you the design of the system after that electrical design would be completed, so that if you wanted to adjust the location of things like inverters, we could absolutely do that. And again, for other districts, we've modified the location of some portions of arrays for other districts because after the contract was signed, something came up that they didn't want to put an array, some part of the array. You can't change the whole game, but they didn't want to put some part of the array there. They wanted to relocate some of that onto a rooftop in Central Columbia's case, which we're finishing up right now. We've been amenable to doing those kinds of things. The same would apply to those sorts of inverter or other equipment locations. We can modify those sorts of things after we get the analysis done.
Mrs. Montaigne, if we straw poll today to get a option, and then that agreement gets presented, I assume that the board won't be able to see that agreement until the agenda is published before the voting meeting. Is that correct?
Currently, the draft, I think that is in the agenda is designed to, at my request actually, the agreement can be approved if that is the will of the board, and then have the option identified, but it doesn't change the terms of the actual contract itself. And we designed it that way specifically so that you could have a discussion about which option might be preferable, if any. And then the contract, though, doesn't have to be modified. I do understand that there is some time pressure in terms of if this is going to go forward, that the option be identified.
But it will change the contract, because the service price for a system that's 42% versus 110%,
yes,
I would assume is going to change, and we're going to need to see that.
Some of the addendum pieces will be modified based on the options. Yes, that has not been completed yet.
And there's a little bit of language in the body of the contract, especially up front in the contract, that kind of describes where the arrays will be located that we have to change. I couldn't pull all of that out into an exhibit.
Right.
But Tim, to answer your question, all of the fundamental terms of the contract, like Sharon was saying, could be approved, and then we'd have to just change the things that were relevant to the specific location and size of the system that you decided on.
I understand that, but with all due respect, I'm not going to approve a contract until I see a pricing agreement. That certainly wouldn't be fair to the public.
That's fair.
Right? I mean, because there is a cost
yes.
to that. Even though I understand that we can get out of that contract before we lay ground on it,
yes.
It wouldn't be fair to the public
sure.
to approve something without them having full privy to how much that was going to cost them.
Well, and I'm 100% in agreement with you that the right way to do this is to decide on what the board would like to do, get that all down in contractual terms, get you that final draft of the contract and approve it and move forward. Absolutely.
Yeah. So the idea for today's discussion, ideally, what I think we should do is go around the table, discuss what one or two options that you are in favor of here. If you're in favor of none, or you just don't want to do the solar, you could say none, but that would help us get an idea of what to move forward with to the voting meeting. And then once we have that information, the final contract can be drafted, can be reviewed, and that would obviously be advertised to the public like anything else is for the voting meeting.
Mr. Bell, for the sake of the board, can we go through the 4 slides very quickly just to remind everybody what the 4 layouts are?
Actually, if you would go back through the slides again and then go to the slide that we didn't get to, that summarizes everything on the same table.
There you go.
Great segue.
So, Joe, I think if you go to slide 6, yes, this is the one you were referring to, Doug.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, Mr. Fiddler, do you mind if we start with you?
Not at all. And my answer is none.
Mr. Quinter? Number 3 is not on your field. Mrs. Schaefer?
Joe, could you move it to slide 4? Yeah, option 4.
Option 4.
So that's one of my options, and then option 1 maybe? And option 1.
Okay. Mr. Morgan?
Option 4.
Dr. Hearing?
Let me try this. I don't like the array that is right up against, what road is that? 562?
Mm-hmm.
I just don't like it button up against it. So that eliminates one, I believe that eliminates 1 and 4. So I'm leaning towards 2.
And Mrs. Wilson?
Number 1.
Number 1. I am in favor of option 4 personally. And Dr. Badler?
I'm actually I'm sorry, can I see, 4 is the surrounding all of the 1. Yeah, no. I think mine, can I see option 2? I'm so sorry. I'd probably have to say option number 3.
Okay. So that leaves us with let's see, 3 for number 4, 2 for number 3, and 1 for number 2. Julia did give a second option for 1 as well.
And 1 for do nothing, which I believe keeps Lausch in the mix, correct?
Yes, assuming that, yes, there could be many interpretations of do nothing, but yes. I guess to Dr. Heron, to your point on with the panels up against the road there for option 4, Doug, would you be able to answer, is there anything that could be done to not have the panels as close to the road but still maintain that the 5.1?
I think we've got an opportunity, and Brian, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the southern part of that array on the lower left of that picture. Hang on, Joe. Shift over the other way if you would, Joe. There it is. There it is. I think some of the land, now we'd have to clear trees there, but I think some of the land that's in that thinner lower tail of the left-hand array, some of that land would have to be cleared, but I think, Brian, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, right along in there, I think if I'm not mistaken, you could relocate some of that array to make that tail of that left-hand array a little bit wider. Again, we'd have to clear trees, scrub trees to do that. But Brian, if I understood a conversation that we had months ago now correctly, there is opportunity to use more of that land in that scrub growth area.
And just to be clear, except for that one residential house, and I'm not saying that that should be an exception. I mean, one person is as important as any. You can see them from the road, but there is no residence across the street from that. That's St. Catherine's property, right. And there's actually a berm there, so I don't even know that you could see it from the church if you were standing at the church looking out.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if that's a downslope versus this actual.
I was wondering that as well.
Yeah, because the way that is, that might be like downhill.
Just if I could just add to the conversation and confusion.
Which do you prefer, Dr. Haller?
Well, just trying to be helpful. So Owatin is somewhat landlocked, as you are well aware. There's only there's the one main access point is in front of the building. When the idea was to build the bus garage there was a secondary access point built on that side where that house is. If there were an emergency, that is our only other access point. And so ultimately it's the board's decision as to how to proceed, but I would recommend that you stay away from that access point because you might need to get emergency vehicles in there.
Which access point? Because there is a roadway in between the panels right there.
That's why they didn't connect.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that, yeah, and that's, yeah. And that spot could be used to put students
Sure.
in that area by the road.
Okay.
Okay.
Good to know. Thank you.
But Brian, are those blue panels, is that kind of facing down a hill or is it right against?
They're facing towards the gun club. Okay, away from the road.
Okay.
So if you can see them from the road, you can see them the underside.
Allison, the way
Now-
these slides work is the south is always down. And the panels are gonna face.
Now, they are
toward-
bifacial panels, correct?
They're bifacial panels,
Yeah.
yes, that's correct.
Okay.
So how much of, I mean, do you think, to Dr. Haller's point, do you think those front 2 rows could be relocated on the back side of that lower left corner? Because that would take your road obstruction out and it would give you more room, Dr. Haller, like you were talking about. Or are you, Dr. Haller, are you suggesting you don't think that there should be any arrays there?
Well, it's just it's a concern because if we would have to bring buses in that way and load students away from the front of the building, you would need some type of area.
So is that all level there? That's where I'm having a
It's-
hard time. Because there's part of, when you drive down 562, part of that is like at a 45-degree angle.
Mm-hmm.
So is this part level or is this part an angle?
And
Because
it's level where the road comes in, but then the berm starts going up.
That's
So
correct.
by the time you get to the playground, you can't see the playground because the berm is so high. It's a steep slope.
but kids could be staged where the current arrays are suggested. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
I'm not really sure.
I'm not sure that they could be staged there, but
Where the bottom 2 arrays were, they could, because that's pretty flat for where the parking lot is over to there.
But I just want to make sure that we have a spot for vehicles to be able to come in and out and make sure that that's not obstructed. And I know the road isn't, but you know, if you would put up fencing, I just think that we need to be thoughtful about making sure that's it, because that is the only other access point to that building.
So Dr. Heller, as laid out right there, is that okay or is that not okay?
I believe that this area here is flat, if I'm not mistaken.
Right,
Not
the bottom
shaking
2
his
rows.
head at me that it's not completely flat. I'm just gonna draw you in that.
It's a slight slope.
That is the flat
So
area.
this is the area we would want to preserve to put students, where these 2 arrays are.
So move them. Road.
So,
Yeah.
So essentially, we could move forward with this contract if we chose with this arrangement and then kind of tweak it to make sure that we preserve the land necessary to make sure if there was an emergency.
Very much
Just
so.
want to make sure I understood that.
Yes.
And if it meant at the end of the day we had to take a row out and it became 99.5, I'm making numbers
There's
up.
nothing magic about the lockdown on these 4 options.
Right.
You could say, we want to do option 2, but we want to take this row out, and we know it's going to be
Right.
a little bit smaller,
Okay.
but we'll do it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, Doug, we could also cut more trees down and move it down further.
That's what I was saying earlier, Brian, yeah.
But I think
Exactly.
that there's a certain point when you come up into that valley that there's trees up above on the mountain that would affect. So,
Yes.
right.
And actually, since you said that, if you decided you wanted to go to something just at Owatton, but you wanted to try to get, for instance, back up to 110% offset, like option 1, we could explore with you where else we would go in that treed area to be able to do something like that. Or, by the same token, if you wanted to take that entire array piece away from the road and relocate it, we could explore with you how we would relocate that into that treed area as well.
But correct me if I'm wrong. The 110 offset includes the electric from Lorraine, and we'd have to get special permission because it's just right over the 2-mile line, or not? Right. Yeah, that's why we didn't include the Lorraine here because the Lorraine's over the 2
It's
mile
over
line.
2 miles, yeah.
But there is a possibility of getting that waived or not.
Well, you could get the credit for it and not apply that electric
To that
Lorraine,
invoice.
You would just get the credit for generating that excess electricity as a district.
Okay.
Oh,
Is the way it would work.
I mean, that's,
So we'd still be
Still
paying
be getting the
electrical
money.
Lorraine, but getting money back.
yeah.
And ultimately, this is just about the money, really.
Yeah.
But we can absolutely look at, I don't want to go crazy and look at 10 other options, honestly, but we can modify, if you want to take something specific out or a couple of rows out and try to relocate them somewhere else, we can absolutely look at doing that kind of adjustment with you. And that's not overly time consuming to do. If the board were able to reach consensus in the next week or so, even before the voting meeting, and you got back to us with, we want to do basically this, but we want to change that, I think we could turn that analysis around and reflect that in a contract, in a final contract form.
Mr. Mel, based on what he said, maybe we should, I mean, this is just a suggestion, maybe we should redo the straw poll by property to say we're looking, if we looked at 100% maximum or greater, that it would be at either Owatton alone, Owatton and Riften, or Owatton, Riften, and Lausch.
Sure.
And then we could arrange a raise as such, but at least we've gotten down to the property selection. That's just a suggestion, and then just making sure that we keep a minimum of 100%. This way, we get our maximum savings opportunity.
That works for me. Yeah. Let's go around again. Mr. Fiddler.
I'm sorry, can I see 4 one more time?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that is 4.
Is that 4?
Yes.
So it's just Owatton is 4. Thank you.
Just Owatton. Yep. Okay.
I was going to say, before we do the straw poll, we have it seems like a majority that would go with 100% or more.
That is my understanding. Yeah. So we have, so it's really just the locations that we need to get buttoned down to make sure we at least have some consensus on that. So, Mr. Fiddler, what would be your thoughts on location? None?
Same answer.
None? Okay. Mr. Quinner? None?
Owatton.
Owatton?
Owatton.
Owatton? Dr. Hearing? Okay. Mrs. Wilson? It's always got to be one. Okay. I'm gonna say Owatton only. And Dr. Badler?
I'm going to go with none.
None? Okay. That we have 4 with Owatton only, 1 with Owatton and Riften. Or no, I'm sorry. There's 4 with Owatton only, 1 with Owatton and Riften, 3 with none. So would you be acceptable to Owatton only?
I would be acceptable to Owatton.
Okay, that brings a majority of Owatton only at.
Why was Lorraine not considered?
I think
because I didn't want to touch sports fields and the roof.
Yeah.
Doesn't have the doesn't have the life.
Yeah, all of the land at Lorraine, from my understanding, is used by youth sports organizations.
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention, when I talked to districts that had solar, the ones that had roof would have preferred to do it on the ground because of issues with roofing and knowing that they're going to have to tear off the units to redo the roof every 20 years. The other one, I talked to one that had variable mounts, or where they have motors that track the sun, and they said they'd never do that again because they're started replacing motors in 4-year time.
They should have called me on that one.
Yeah. Yeah, so they if you do it through the fixed mount, even though the extra 5 or 10% you get from tracking the sun, it's not worth it to them because they're maintenance issues. So everyone I talked to that had them say stick with the fixed ground mounts.
And I am forgetting to include Dr. Hemberger, who is absent tonight, but he has already said he would be in favor of entertaining just Owatton, as long as it's upwards of 100%. So that would be sixth person joining that. Any other discussion?
So now I can ignore the potential health things too.
Well, Bob, actually, while you were speaking, I did look online, and cancer.gov says there's no evidence.
Provide you with the copies of where I go. I spent all afternoon looking at it.
It referenced those studies, and there's still no definitive evidence of any link between cancer and solar panel usage.
Good. You take your chance.
Okay, thank you.
So I can have clarification.
Yes.
Is the directive so that we can be prepared for the voting meeting to update with an Awatin plan, which I see as option 4, and get the contract updated with the exhibits? Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think we're saying go forward with option 4 to get a contract ready, with obviously the understanding that there is probably going to be some reconfiguration of the panels at some point, but I think we're still all agreeing that 5.1 megawatt usage at that location. At least the majority.
And again, if you could let us know in the shorter term what changes you'd like to make, we could maybe jump on that quickly and get those changes made if you want to do that, Jason.
Okay. Dr. Haller, is it possible that you could take a ride out there and take a look at the property, maybe with Mr. Fike or
I've been on the Gator. I don't like it, so I'll walk. But thank you.
out of curiosity, if it abuts the road, does the chain link fence still go there, or is it?
Oh, yeah, it would set back enough. The chain link fences. We put chain link fences around every array that we do. The setback would be adequate. That the fence would be up at a setback itself to the road.
Is there a danger of a motor vehicle accident damaging those?
Again, that's part of the setbacks. I don't believe so.
Gotcha.
We factor that all into the design.
And it is a state road, so I'm sure the setbacks is further than like your normal municipal county road.
Correct.
Yeah.
Dr. Hearing, that's it for my committee report.
Thank you, Mr. Mount.
Thanks,
Personnel, Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Dr. Herring. First, we have an updated supervisor of transportation job description. I believe that is attached. Is there any discussion? Okay. Next, we have a couple personnel. We have resignations. We have appointments, change of status, leave of absence, and summer work.
Can we have an explanation of the summer work, please?
Sure. We over the course of last year, we hired a number of employees during the year. When someone is hired and they don't have tenure, they have to go through induction as part of receiving tenure. The person that was here for the summer work participated in flex days because that was important for her professional development, but also needed to complete the induction days that if she would have been hired back in August or July, she would have had an opportunity to do so. So because both those things were so important, the participating in the professional development and also participating in the induction to get her certificate, her level 1 or her level 2 certificate, and for tenure eventually, we needed to pay her for both things.
And the last two things, the first one that I'd like to discuss is the change of the general cafeteria substitutes rates. And it says here that it is recommended the Board of School Directors approve the change rate of the general cafeteria substitute from $10.50 an hour to $14 an hour. And if we could have some explanation and then possible discussion about that.
I can discuss it. We just settled the cafeteria contract. The general cafeteria workers start at $15 an hour. They used to start at $11.50, I think it was. But we never changed, since the substitute's not within the contract. It's up to the board to set a substitute rate. We have not been able to get substitutes for the cafeteria people because they know what the existing rate is that the general workers are working.
So my personal recommendation, while I understand, well, first of all, I mean, it's a big jump, but I understand it's competitive. Well, I understand that the presumption is that that's why we're not getting substitutes. I think it's hard to determine that. I would like to actually see us do a trial run of this, possibly do a 90 days would be my suggestion at the $14 an hour. If the administration can come back to us and say that this absolutely showed an effect and that as a result of this we were able to fill those substitutions, then we could continue to maintain that rate. However, I don't want to just increase the rate and then have the same problem 6 months down the road. And that's my fear, that that's what's going to happen. I don't really think there's any data to say that it is or it isn't. I would assume that everyone is short subs, and so getting those subs is more difficult. That's my thoughts.
I believe we did that a few years ago with regular substitutes, that we raised the rates and then said we didn't get more subs because of it, so we lowered the rates again, but then we ended up raising the rates again. So it does keep some people there.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it as a temporary thing. I don't know the time frame in terms of how long does it take to advertise, interview, and get people hired for substitute positions. I don't know what the appropriate time frame.
I think we'd see a difference just in people applying, because right now no one's applying.
So 90 day.
And we had people apply and then find out what the rate was and then pull their applications. So.
And a general cafeteria substitute, how many hours per day is that?
You're 3.5, maybe 4 max.
Okay, so $10 or $11.
No benefits.
There's no harm in doing 90 days. If it works, we keep it forever.
What advantage is there to doing 90 days if we're talking $12 for a substitute cafeteria worker to stay all day difference? I don't see going through the whole rigmarole twice or 3 times.
I would say, based on what we just heard, that we could take that $12 and put it towards the capital budget. Seems like we need it there.
I don't know. I don't think that we should do 90 days. I really don't. Because I think in 90 days it's saying, okay, you weren't that important. You're not worth $10 more per day. The people that we do have, you know, if they're worth $14 an hour, they're worth $14 an hour.
Can I just make one comment real fast? This is out of the cafeteria fund, food service fund, which is a federal program. It has nothing to do with the general fund. You know, this is where we get reimbursed for meals and, you know, a certain percentage.
Should have probably let off with that, Brian.
I'm sorry. You're right. My bad. Slap my hand.
Yeah, that's fine. I retract my comment. And then the last thing is creation of a position. Is recommended the Board of School Directors approve the following position: a cyber school facilitator, teacher on special assignment, per the attached job description. This cyber position will be funded through the State Ready to Learn grant. Dr. Haller.
So currently we do run our own cyber program, and we took and it's grown since COVID. And we took our instructional coach, Dan Wilczek, who is great, and he's been facilitating the cyber program, which took him out of his coaching responsibilities. And now that we're back in school, we need Dan back in that role in assisting teachers on how to use technology. It's created a big gap for us. And he's our only instructional coach that we have in the district. We previously had 3. So in looking at the Ready to Learn grant, which is coming due on November 30th, that's when we have to submit it. There is funding that is available that we believe that we can use to support this position, and we'd like to do it as a teacher on a special assignment because we are also monitoring our cyber program. We don't anticipate it going down drastically, but in case that it would, we would like some flexibility in just seeing if this is a good model for us without having to fully commit to this position at this time. So we would be looking to hire someone in-house, and hopefully we anticipate a teacher applying for it. By doing it as a teacher on special assignment, their position within the union is secure. They could go back to their teaching position. We would then fill it with a LTS, and as we monitor our numbers, we might also be able to move somebody else into that position. So, like I said, it gives us some flexibility in that position with the cyber, but also maintaining their position as well.
And how did you say it was funded, or it's already built in?
We are coming due for the Ready to Learn grant, and that's how we're seeking to pay for it.
Okay. And we're expecting that grant to pay for it every year?
Right now, it's a grant that we get every
year. So we'd anticipate to allocate that towards this position.
Mm-hmm.
They have never decreased it, so
Okay.
it seems to be level funded every single year. So hopefully,
Okay.
Yeah, and it's a grant that we use to pay for positions. So that's an appropriate expenditure for that grant because the grants are earmarked for certain things.
Okay, Mr. Morgan, thank you. Thank you. Policy Committee, Mrs. Harris, can you handle that?
I sure can. So we have 3 policies on the agenda tonight. One of them is on for second reading. That's Policy 227 that you heard about last month. And then we have Policy 201, Admission of Students, and Policy 808, Food Services, that are on for first reading. For admission of students, back during COVID, during the lockdown, you added some verbiage to the admissions policy that put a moratorium on early admissions testing for kindergarten because your staff weren't allowed on campus to do any assessments and testing. So I'm taking that language out of there. We actually have engaged in early admissions testing over the summer. Dr. Flam's office is working on putting together some updated procedures for that process. And then Policy 808, there's a revision based on Act 55. There was language in the policy previously that said schools had the option to assist families with regarding to filling out the free reduced application. Now the language says that school districts are mandated to offer assistance with filling out that application if that's requested by a family. Additionally, in there, there's language that has existed that says a student cannot be required to discard a school meal after it was served to the student, even if the student's unable to pay for it. Now that language says neither a student nor a staff member can discard that school meal. So those are the policy revisions that are on the agenda.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Harris. Okay, next we move on to public comment. No one signed up unless someone has changed their mind and would like to speak. Okay, then we will be moving forward to moving the following items to our voting agenda. We'll be doing meeting minutes. Item 4A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I. Item 5A, B, as well as moving forward the wrestling team's trip to Newcastle, Delaware. Item 6A, B,
D and E.
D, E with Plan 4.
Yep.
Item 7A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and item 8A. Okay. At this point, are there any board members that would like to be heard?
Dr. Heller, a couple months back, we had a general discussion about some grants and that grant money had been taken away from safety and added to ESSERS during COVID, I believe. And I'm just wondering where we're at with that, if the state has reissued that grant money and if we're applying for it and how that's looking.
I guess, Dawn, I can take this. Are you talking the RPES or the Safety and Security Coordinator?
So, well, for years, the district, the state did give money for different things. But that when we hit COVID, we received a lot of other grant money, and some of the other grant money dried up, and it was all funneled into ESSER funds, which is now also drying up. However, in response to some tragic events that have happened since COVID has been happening, the state has been looking at reinstating those grants, and it's been in the paper. So they gave school districts money towards mental health, and they gave states money towards school safety. So we are the recipient of those grants. Dawn Harris was actually the one that wrote the grants for us to be able to receive that money. We are anticipating that there could be some federal money that's coming through, but we're not sure about that. The challenge with grants is that you don't always know how long they're here to stay. And so you have to be thoughtful about the expenditures that you make when you have grant money. So to put Dawn on the spot, I'm going to have her talk about what we are doing with our grant money, if that's okay. Well, we haven't gotten approval, but what is been.
Yeah, we have not received the award letter yet. So for the particular grant that Christy is talking about, the way the grant is set up is that districts were expected to meet certain tiers of services and equipment, and you had to meet the first tier. If you had everything in that tier, you could apply for things that were in the next tier, and so on and so forth. As we have discussed, and I'll keep this a little vague on purpose, but as we've discussed around school safety, some of the things that we need to work on are physical security here in the district, and so the safety and security portion of that grant has been applied for physical security things that Mr. Biggerstaff and Mr. Fike have recommended for us. And then the mental health side of that grant is being used to provide mental health personnel for the district.
Thank you. I always like hearing about money that comes in.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
We do too. And just to go back to what Christy was saying, so back in 2018 when Act 44 came out, there were very specific grants through the PCCD venue that were school safety grants. There was a Part A and a Part B. Part of that grant was meritorious and part of that grant was non-competitive. So you were guaranteed at least a little bit of the money, and then the other part was a competitive portion of the grant. Those are the grants that went away when COVID hit, and they started giving us all of the money for ESSER and for PPE equipment. There also used to be a different set of safety grants that came through PDE, which have also not been renewed, and they were all meritorious. And those funds have not been available since COVID started.
Thank you. And then one more thing, I did get the opportunity to spend some time with Mr. Hathaway this weekend, sorry. And they were part of a day of giving with North Star, and maybe Mr. Hathaway, you can give a quick 30-second synopsis of what they did for you, because I think it's pretty cool.
Mr. Hathaway, could you come up to the microphone so the people at home could hear you?
And it was a pleasure to be around and see what they did, you know, what the community is doing for the schools. And
yeah, community partnership matters. Wendy Orslick approached me about a Day of Giving project at Jacksonwald. She got a group of teachers together to identify some projects that kind of get let go. One was the main lobby area, one was the faculty room, and the other was a book room that we're trying to reinstate upstairs. The church raised over $2,800 for us, and had 20 to 25 members of their congregation work most of the day on Sunday to develop those spaces. So just a big thank you to Mr. Morgan for hanging some shelves with his son, and really to the North Star Church for their generosity and their time.
thank you, and it looks fantastic. And you know, it's always good to hear, not only when we're doing things in the community, but when the community reaches out and does things for us. So that's pretty awesome. Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Okay. That concludes our October Committee of a Whole meeting. Please note that our next meeting will be Wednesday, October 17th for our voting meeting. And please come out and do homecoming the next couple of days. It's going to be beautiful. I'm excited about it. And, sorry? Yeah, the next meeting is a month. I thank you. Let's do that over. We'll be meeting Monday, October 17th. Is that the 17th? I don't. Okay. I declare this meeting